On Purim and Hanukkah, we recite the Al Hanisim prayer in the Thanksgiving section of the Amidah. Both holidays' prayers have the same opening line, giving thanks, Al Hanisim v'al Hapurkan v'al Hagavurot, v'al Hatshuot v'al Hamilchamot, for the miracles, for the redemption, for the mighty deeds, for the deliverances, and for the wars. Shasita lavotini ba'imim bahem bazman hazeh, that you performed for our ancestors in those days at this season. On Hanukkah, we continue with a brief recounting of the Maccabees' divinely supported rebellion and purification and rededication of the temple. And on Purim, we continue with a brief recounting of the story of Esther and Mordechai in Shushan, highlighting God's role in the salvation. This prayer stands in contrast with the additions we make to the workday Amidah for other holidays. On Rosh Chodesh and the pilgrimage holidays, we add the Ya'aleh V'Yavo prayer to the Ritzei section that asks that God be pleased with our offerings and return to dwell among us. The Ya'aleh V'Yavo prayer is a general expression of hope that God remember and deliver us, which mentions whichever holy day it is recited on, but otherwise does not have obvious specific content for those days. Purim and Hanukkah are fundamentally different from the other holidays in the way they commemorate historical incidents. Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot are agricultural harvest holidays and were pilgrimage festivals of special gathering and worship at the temple. Rosh Chodesh marks the lunar cycle. All of these days signify our relationship to the natural and cosmic cycles. It's true that Passover commemorates the exodus from Egypt and Shavuot, the giving of the Torah at Sinai, while Sukkot commemorates the protection we received in the wilderness. But we're not meant to understand those narratives simply as historical moments that are in our past to be remembered. Instead, they're ongoing truths we live. On Passover, we're all required to each and every generation to see ourselves as if we left Egypt. It was not only our ancestors who God redeemed, rather God redeemed us along with them. We see ourselves in the story, and Dr. Aviva Zornberg points out that even in the story told in the book of Exodus, quote, all the complex events of the Exodus are lema'an tisaper, in order that you may relate the story. And quote, it is precisely through narration, by fulfilling the biblical imperative to tell the story, by the continuing interaction between parents and children, that transformed versions of self and of the meaning of liberation will be generated. In other words, it is the telling of the story of the Exodus every day, and especially on Passover, that is the liberation of which we speak. The miraculous liberation of the Exodus is not an ancient event to be remembered, but an ongoing truth to be actively lived, generation after generation. Similarly, the receiving of the Torah at Sinai is not only an event of the past. Deuteronomy 5:19 describes the revelation at Sinai, saying, God spoke these words to your whole congregation at the mountain from within the fire and the cloud and the fog, Kol Hagadol, with a great voice, Velo Yasaf. That last phrase has been interpreted in contradictory ways, but one of the ways it is understood is that it means the voice never ceased. As Professor Tamar Ross has put it, revelation is a cumulative process, a dynamic unfolding of the original Torah transmitted at Sinai that reveals in time its ultimate significance. Torah as a series of ongoing hearings of the voice at Sinai throughout Jewish history. This voice is always there waiting to be heard. But Purim and Hanukkah are not like Passover and Shavuot in this way. These later holidays are really focused on remembering events that happened lavotenu b'yamim b'hem hazman hazeh, to our ancestors in those days at this time of the year. Purim and Hanukkah don't fit in the cosmic holiday cycle with Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Instead, I would argue, they fit into a spectrum of other observances of personal, familial, communal, and national memory of miracles. I'll lay out some of those examples of practices that exist in the same commemorative framework as Purim and Hanukkah. The Mishnah in Masechet Brachot says that if you see a place where miracles were done for the people of Israel, you say a blessing. Blessed are you, God, who did miracles for our ancestors in this place. The Talmud asks in surprise, do we really only say blessings for miracles that happen to many people and not also for personal miracles? It goes on to tell stories of a man in Babylon who survived a lion attack and how the sage Rava instructed him to make a blessing every time he came to the spot where it happened. It tells of the son of Ravina, who once miraculously found a wellspring when he was thirsty in the desert, and who another time was attacked by a camel in the marketplace, where a wall opened up a space to hide him. Whenever he came to either of those places, he would make a bracha, a blessing, on both of the miracles. The Talmud concludes, for a miracle of the multitudes, everyone has to bless. For a miracle of an individual, they have to bless. And according to other versions of the Talmud and later halachic decisors, also their children and grandchildren make a blessing in that spot. Like those location-based blessings over past miracles, Purim and Chanukah represent celebrations of past miracles based on the time of year. And with Al Hanisim, we recite a blessing for those miracles within the Thanksgiving portion of the Amidah. Many different communities throughout the Jewish diaspora have celebrated annual Purim Sheni holidays, second Purims, for times when the particular community narrowly avoided catastrophe. These celebrations include festive meals and charity, their own Megillot, so to speak, retelling the story of what had happened in their town, as well as specially composed prayers and songs, sometimes modeled after the Al Hanisim prayer. Some families similarly celebrate the anniversaries of days in their own histories with their own family Purim holidays. These holidays of particular communities and families are often described as modeled after the holiday of Purim. But you could see it the other way too. Purim and Hanukkah were once local, particular holidays that the broader Jewish community adopted and fixed for all generations and even canonized a special prayer for them in the Amidah. The end of Megillat Esther describes how Jews spontaneously celebrated their victories wherever they were throughout the empire. Then Mordechai sent dispatches to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, charging them to observe the 14th and 15th days of Adar every year, the same days on which the Jews enjoyed relief from their foes, and the same month which had been transformed for them from one of grief and mourning to one of festive joy. They were to observe them as days of feasting and merrymaking, and as an occasion for sending gifts to one another and presents to the poor. The Jews accordingly assumed as an obligation that which they had begun to practice and which Mordechai prescribed for them. And later we read that Esther sent a second letter reaffirming the establishment of the holiday. And Esther's ordinance validating these observances of Purim was recorded in a scroll. The Talmud describes this process of establishing the holiday Purim as a back and forth between Esther and the sages, in which they initially resisted the attempt to make a new holiday or canonize the book of Esther, and ultimately she convinced them to do so. Hanukkah seems to have gone through a similar process. The second book of Maccabees opens with a letter from the Jews of Judea to the Jews of Egypt, in which they announce their intention to commemorate the rededication of the temple with a holiday, and urge their compatriots to do the same, saying, quote, and now we desire to celebrate the day of the dedication of the altar on the 25th of the month of Kislev. We did not refrain from notifying you to celebrate it with us. Many times throughout our history, communities have been saved from great danger, and we've established holidays to commemorate those miraculous occurrences. In the cases of Purim and Hanukkah, those celebrations became canonized for the broader Jewish community and included through the Al Hanisim prayer in the Amidah. Personally, I find the inclusion of Al Hanisim in the Amidah somewhat surprising. I experience praying the Amidah as weaving around myself a timeless, abstract space in which I approach the divine. So it's a little disorienting to then zoom into these particular historical moments. I try to let it cultivate in me a sense of living in the present, living in no time, and also living in historical memory simultaneously, connecting with God both through time and beyond time. I also try to make sure the stories of Purim and Hanukkah are having the right impact on me. I want to take inspiration that there is hope for getting out of terrible situations, even when it seems like it would take a miracle, as well as appreciation for the miracle of existence, of survival, of my ancient people. At the same time, it's important to me to remember not to automatically see myself as the Mordechai, the Esther, or the Maccabees of the stories. I need to take these stories of good and evil as a warning to make sure that I am not on the side of Haman of Antiochus, of hate and empire. The stories must be a moral charge, not a proud re-aggravation of identity. Finally, I'd like to take these inserted storytelling prayers as a reminder to take time to pause and reflect on traumas and glories that have made me who I am. Ancient stories, episodes throughout the ages and generations, family narratives, and my own personal experiences. Purim and Hanukkah remind us that even outside the cosmic, divine, and natural epic cycles of life, there are incidents that are paradigm shifting, are cataclysmic in determining who we are. Those too must be remembered and are deserving of ritual, reflection, and prayer. God bless.